Welcome back, everyone. In today's explainer, we are looking at something that is honestly just completely wild. The year 2026 is coming up fast, and with it comes the 250th anniversary of the United States, the semi-quincentennial. But what exactly are we celebrating? And maybe more importantly, how are we supposed to celebrate it? We are going to dive into two incredibly different source materials today, and they present entirely opposing visions for this upcoming milestone. On one side, we have the official, massive, government-backed civic celebration. But then, on the exact opposite side, we have this highly complex shadow manifesto. And this document is out here claiming sovereign rights, alleging these deep systemic atrocities, and literally demanding a total economic reset. It's a really fascinating juxtaposition, and I am absolutely thrilled to break this all down for you today. Honestly, the sheer scale of the contrast here is hard to wrap your head around at first. On one side, the mainstream vision for July 4th, 2026 is literally branded as a national block party. It's designed to be this joyous, synchronized, coast-to-coast celebration of American history. Sounds great, right? Well, on the opposing side, our alternative source material views 2026 not as a party at all. Instead, it sees that date as a hard, absolute deadline for what it calls a $100 trillion reparative alignment. This alternative framework makes the argument that the nation cannot possibly celebrate its birth until it addresses some extremely deep systemic issues. So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start by looking at the official America 250 milestone. Then we'll check out the historical legacy of John Nixon. From there, we are diving right into the alternative narrative, the Maine Declaration Project, the sovereign ancestry claim, something called the living ledger theory, and finally, we'll break down that massive $100 trillion demand. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the America 250 milestone, the official plan for the semi-quincentennial. So, this is the surface-level, officially sanctioned plan, and it's being organized by the U.S. Semi-Quincentennial Commission. And their ultimate goal is perfectly captured by one massive number, 350 million. The commission has actually set up an initiative that they call 350 by 250. Basically, their stated objective is to engage every single one of the 350 million Americans in this commemorative journey by the time July 4th, 2026 rolls around. As you can imagine, it is a massive logistical and civic undertaking. And to actually hit that 350 million mark, they've rolled out a bunch of government-backed public initiatives. They've got America's Block Party, which is all about localized, synchronized celebrations. Then there's America Gives, which is aimed at making 2026 a record-setting year for volunteer service across the country. They also have America Innovates to showcase technological and cultural advancements, and Our American Story, which is this big effort to gather and highlight the unsung champions of American history. Overall, the official plan is all about unity, reflection, and looking forward together. Moving right along to Section 2, the legacy of John Nixon, the bridge between 1776 and modern banking. Now, John Nixon is a fascinating historical figure, primarily because he acts as the crucial bridge between our two different sources today. Back in 1776, he was actually the very first person to publicly read the Declaration of Independence aloud from the steps of the State House in Philadelphia. That's a pretty big deal on its own, but he wasn't just a patriot, he was a financial architect. In 1784, he became a director of the Bank of North America, which was the country's first national bank. And by 1789, he was busy organizing the Bank of Pennsylvania to help supply the U.S. Army. So this guy literally stood at the very intersection of American political independence and early institutional finance. Keep his name in the back of your mind, because he is absolutely central to our next set of documents. Which brings us to Section 3, the Maine Declaration Project, the alternative 2026 intervention. Okay, so here is where we leave the official mainstream history behind and step into the Shadow Manifesto. The core ideological question that this counter-movement raises is simply this: what if 2026 isn't a celebration at all, but an intervention? The authors of these alternative documents actually claim that celebrating the nation's birth is a moral impossibility. They argue you literally cannot celebrate without first addressing what they describe as unwitnessed systemic darkness and deep institutional failures that are currently operating within the country. So what's their solution? Well, they propose something called the Assembly of 20. The documents outline a plan to hand-select 20 women, chosen specifically for their psychological strength and moral courage. The plan is for them to gather at a remote, secure estate up on the coast of Maine for a 30-day residency, and this residency is broken down into 4 distinct phases. Phase 1 is the witnessing, where they'll review evidence of systemic abuse. Phase 2 is the inquiry, which involves cross-referencing that evidence with public records. Phase 3 is deliberation, where they aim to pinpoint the root institutional causes. And finally, Phase 4 is the drafting. That's where they actually author an entirely new declaration of truth to present to the government before July 4th, 2026. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly are these 20 women supposed to be investigating? According to the source documents, their mandate is to review alleged extreme multi-domain violence and technological exploitation. And a really central focus here is something defined in the texts as V2K, or voice to skull. The manifesto describes V2K as invasive, non-kinetic, directed energy psychological torture. It's intense stuff. The Assembly's stated goal is to document these specific, unwitnessed atrocities and ultimately establish what they are calling the right to cognitive liberty in their new declaration. Let's move into Section 4, the Sovereign Ancestry Claim, merging royal bloodlines with American capital. So the authors of this manifesto, who refer to themselves as the Prussian applicant, base their authority to intervene on this incredibly complex genealogical and financial claim. They essentially map out two distinct ancestral pillars. On one hand, they claim descent from Hohenstein royal authority, which is European-mediated royalty. They argue this royal lineage provides an inherent historical sovereign credit. On the other hand, they claim this exact royal bloodline merged with Nixon institutional banking. Yes, tying directly back to John Nixon, the man who read the declaration. According to the manifesto, the Hohensteins provided the sovereign status, while the Nixon family provided the American financial infrastructure to hide and grow this invisible capital throughout the entire 19th and 20th centuries. That takes us to Section 5, the living ledger theory, the individual as a macroeconomic mirror. So how exactly does all this historical sovereign wealth actually manifest today? Well, the documents define a concept called the living ledger. It's a highly heterodox economic model. It argues that a living heir to this Hohenstein-Nixon lineage isn't just a regular participant in the economy. They actually are the economy. The theory posits that this specific individual acts like a tuning fork or a macroeconomic mirror. What that means is their personal physical life events directly dictate the stability and health of the entire United States financial system. They are essentially treating a single human life like a live economic stock ticker. It is a wildly different way of looking at macroeconomics. To put that into perspective, the source documents claim that the individual's physical movements directly create systemic, nationwide results. For example, they point to 2013, saying the heir's participation in New York City corporate work perfectly mirrored the nation's peak private sector job expansion. Conversely, the documents claim that between 2021 and 2022, the heir faced legal incarceration in Washington state. Because this sovereign energy was forcibly withheld, the theory argues it created a massive value vacuum. And according to the text, this vacuum directly resulted in the national 7% CPI inflation surge and the government's very real flirtation with the vault. So in their view, the individual's restriction literally mirrored the nation's fiscal freeze. And that leads us right into Section 6, $100 trillion demand, the notice served to Washington state. This is the moment where the historical, genealogical claims and the living ledger theory all converge into one final legal push. According to their notice of calculation, this unprecedented $100 trillion settlement demand is broken down into very specific equities. Let's look at the math they present. $40 trillion is claimed for the Holland-Prussian capital anchor, which is essentially framed as compounded interest on the sovereign credit provided by the royal lineage all the way back since the 1800s. Then $25 trillion is for the Nixon institutional multiplier, placing a monetary value on the banking stability that the family supposedly provided. Another $20 trillion is earmarked for reparative alignment, calculated as damages for withholding value during that period of incarceration we just talked about. And finally, the remaining $15 trillion is categorized as information capital. The ultimate philosophical goal of this entire sovereign proposal is summarized in this incredibly bold quote from the source documents. It reads, "We are transitioning from a fiat-backed economy to a story-backed or truth-backed equity." The author is essentially arguing that the next global reserve currency won't be made of paper, and it won't be digital code either. Instead, they believe it will be a transparent ledger that recognizes the historical truth of this specific lineage, aiming to replace traditional fiat volatility with this concept of reparative alignment. So we are left with a massive juxtaposition as we take closer to July 4th, 2026. Will the 250th anniversary simply be a reflection on our past, celebrated alongside 350 million people at a giant national block party? Or, as this alternative manifesto demands, will it be the catalyst for an entirely new definition of value, driven by shadow histories and sovereign claims? While one is literally a government-planned block party and the other is a fringe financial manifesto, they both force us to ask a really profound question: who really owns the American narrative? It is a fascinating collision of civic celebration and deeply heterodox theory. Thank you so much for exploring these two wild visions with me today. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.